When you first decide to install Linux Mint, one of the very first choices you're asked to make is something that might sound technical, but actually shapes your entire daily experience. Cinnamon, Mate, or XFCE, at a glance, they might look similar. They all boot into a familiar desktop layout with a panel, a menu, icons, and windows. But underneath that surface, they feel very different in performance, customization, workflow, and long-term usability. So in this video, we're going to break down Linux Mint Cinnamon versus Mate versus XFCE in detail and help you decide which one you should choose based on your hardware, your workflow, and your expectations from a desktop operating system. Let's start with the big picture. Linux Mint is built on Ubuntu's long-term support base, which means all three editions share the same core system, the same package repositories, the same update manager, and the same overall stability and security foundation. The difference is purely in the desktop environment. Think of it like three different interiors built on the same engine and chassis. The performance, appearance, responsiveness, system resource usage, and customization options largely depend on the desktop environment you choose. We'll begin with Cinnamon, because that's the flagship edition of Linux Mint. Cinnamon is developed primarily by the Linux Mint team itself, and it's designed to deliver a modern, full-featured desktop that feels familiar to Windows users while still offering the flexibility and power of Linux. When you boot into Cinnamon, you're greeted with a sleek panel at the bottom, a menu button on the left, system tray icons on the right, and a clean desktop in the middle. It feels polished and contemporary. Animations are smooth, transitions are fluid. The default theme looks modern without being overwhelming. Cinnamon uses the Muffin Window Manager and includes compositing effects by default. That means you get features like window shadows, fade animations, and transparency. It also means slightly higher resource usage compared to the other editions. On a modern system with at least 4 GB of RAM and a reasonably capable CPU and GPU, Cinnamon runs beautifully. It feels responsive and refined. But on older hardware, especially machines with 2 GB of RAM or older integrated graphics, you may start to notice lag or... In terms of customization, Cinnamon strikes a balance between power and simplicity. You can change themes, icons, desklets, applets, panel layout, window behavior, fonts, and more using graphical settings tools. You don't have to edit configuration files manually. There's a built-in system settings panel that organizes everything clearly. You can even download community-created themes and extensions directly from within the settings interface. For users who enjoy tweaking their desktop but don't want to dive into complex manual configuration, Cinnamon is very approachable. Cinnamon also supports modern desktop features like a polished file manager called Nemo, which supports dual panes, plugins, network browsing, and extensions. The overall integration of the system feels cohesive because it's designed specifically for Linux Mint. Updates are tested with Cinnamon in mind first, so it's often the most tightly integrated experience. Now, let's talk about Mate. Mate is essentially a continuation of the old GNOME 2 desktop, preserved and modernized after GNOME 3 shifted toward a different design philosophy. If Cinnamon is about modern polish, Mate is about classic simplicity. When you log into Mate, the experience feels traditional. By default, you might see a 2-panel layout with a top panel for menus and system indicators and a bottom panel for window switching. It feels very straightforward, very functional, and very lightweight compared to Cinnamon. Mate uses the Marco Window Manager by default, and it does not rely as heavily on compositing or graphical effects. This means lower system resource usage. On systems with 2 GB or 4 GB of RAM, Mate often feels snappier than Cinnamon. It's not as minimal as XFCE, but it's clearly lighter than Cinnamon. It strikes a middle ground between performance and features. One of the strengths of Mate is its flexibility. You can rearrange panels, add applets, move menus, and customize layout extensively. In fact, some users find Mate even more flexible than Cinnamon in terms of panel configuration. You can recreate a Windows-like layout, a classic GNOME 2 style layout, or something entirely custom. And because Mate has been around for years, it's extremely stable. It rarely surprises you. It rarely changes drastically between versions. It just works. The visual appearance of Mate is a bit more traditional and less flashy. Animations are minimal. The default themes are clean, but not cutting-edge modern. That can be either a strength or a weakness, depending on what you prefer. If you want something that looks fresh and contemporary, Cinnamon may appeal more. If you value consistency and stability over visual effects, Mate might feel more comfortable. Mate's file manager, Kea, is a fork of the old GNOME file manager. It's reliable, simple, and supports extensions, but it doesn't feel as modern as Nemo and Cinnamon. Still, for everyday tasks like managing files, connecting to network shares, or organizing documents, it does everything you need. Now let's move on to XFCE. XFCE is the lightest of the three editions and is specifically designed for efficiency and performance. When you install Linux Mint XFCE, you're getting a desktop environment that is extremely lightweight, modular, and fast. On older hardware, especially machines with limited RAM or older CPU, XFCE can feel dramatically more responsive than Cinnamon and even somewhat lighter than Mate. XFCE uses the XFWM window manager and is built with performance in mind. It does support compositing, but it's optional and lightweight. Out of the box, the interface might look simpler and less polished than Cinnamon. The default layout is usually a single panel at the bottom or top with a menu and system tray. It's clean and functional, but not flashy. One of XFCE's greatest strengths is how little it demands from your system. On a machine with 2 GB of RAM, XFCE can run comfortably. On very old laptops or repurposed desktops, XFCE often makes the difference between a usable system and a frustrating one. Boot times are fast. Applications open quickly. The desktop remains responsive even under heavier load. However, XFCE can require a bit more manual configuration if you want it to look modern. Out of the box, it may not look as refined as Cinnamon. But with some theme adjustments, icon packs, and panel tweaks, XFCE can be customized into something very attractive. The trade-off is that customization sometimes requires digging deeper into settings rather than using centralized theme download tools like Cinnamon provides. XFCE's file manager Thuner is lightweight and fast. It doesn't have as many built-in features as Nemo, but it's extremely efficient. It handles large directories well and feels very responsive. For basic file management, it's excellent. Advanced features can be added through plugins if needed. Now let's talk directly about performance comparisons. On modern hardware with 8 GB or more RAM, the difference between Cinnamon, Mate, and XFCE in everyday use may feel negligible. All three will run smoothly. The choice becomes more about aesthetics and workflow preference rather than performance. But on mid-range or older hardware, the differences become clearer. Cinnamon typically uses the most RAM and CPU at idle. Mate sits in the middle. XFCE uses the least. If you open multiple browser tabs, run office applications, stream video, and multitask heavily, Cinnamon's additional visual effects may slightly increase resource usage. Mate handles multitasking well with fewer effects. XFCE remains the most resource efficient during heavier workloads. Now let's discuss stability and long-term reliability. All three editions of Linux Mint are stable because they share the same Ubuntu LTS base. However, Cinnamon is developed in-house by the Mint team, which means updates are closely integrated. If there's a bug affecting Mint-specific tools, Cinnamon is usually prioritized. MATE and XFCE are maintained upstream by their respective communities, but Mint packages and tests them carefully. In practice, stability is excellent across all three. Another factor to consider is familiarity. If you're coming from Windows 7 or Windows 10, Cinnamon will feel the most familiar immediately. The layout, menu structure, and system tray arrangement are very similar. Mate also feels familiar, but slightly more classic. XFCE can be made to look like Windows, but may require a bit of tweaking. If you're coming from older Linux systems or you miss the classic GNOME to layout, Mate might feel nostalgic and comfortable. If you value speed above all else and don't care as much about eye candy, XFCE will likely impress you. Customization philosophy is another difference. Cinnamon focuses on user-friendly customization with graphical tools. Mate offers deep panel and layout customization with a traditional approach. XFCE offers modular flexibility, but sometimes requires more manual configuration. Power users often debate which one is best. The truth is that best depends entirely on your priorities. If you have modern hardware and want a polished, modern, feature-rich desktop with smooth animations and integrated tools, choose Cinnamon. If you want a stable, traditional desktop that's lighter but still full-featured, choose Mate. If you have older hardware or prioritize speed and minimal resource usage, choose X. Another angle to consider is battery life on laptops. Because XFCE and Mate generally use fewer graphical effects and lower CPU usage at idle, they can sometimes provide slightly better battery efficiency on older laptops. Cinnamon is not inefficient, but its compositing and animations may consume slightly more power. Software compatibility is identical across all three editions. You can install the same applications. You can even install other desktop environments later if you want to experiment. The difference is purely in default experience and system resource usage. Community support is strong for all three. Cinnamon has the advantage of being Mint's flagship, so tutorials and screenshots often reference it. MATE and XFCE have long-standing communities and documentation as well. If you're a beginner who wants something that just works and looks modern without tweaking, Cinnamon is often the easiest recommendation. If you're installing Linux Mint on an aging laptop to revive it, XFCE is often the safest choice. If you want something balanced, lightweight, but still traditional and customizable, Mate sits comfortably in the middle. Ultimately, Linux Mint gives you the luxury of choice without forcing you into one design philosophy. And that's one of its greatest strengths. Instead of asking which one is objectively better, ask yourself what matters most to you: visual, Polish classic, simplicity, or maximum performance. If you can test them in live USB mode before installing, spend a few minutes opening menus, dragging windows, exploring settings. You'll quickly feel which one resonates with you. The best desktop environment is the one that feels natural when you use it every day. So when choosing between Linux Mint, Cinnamon, Mate, and XFCE, remember this simple summary. Cinnamon is modern and polished. Mate is classic and balanced. XFCE is lightweight and fast. All three are stable. All three are reliable. The right choice depends on your hardware and your personal workflow. And that's the beauty of Linux Mint. It doesn't lock you in. It gives you options. Choose the one that fits your needs today, knowing you can always change later if your preferences evolve.